suited and booted. It's Sunday night on y Bronx. Shwmai? Alright pawb? Gyswch chi le fi hyn o? Do you know where I am? Can any of you guess? I'm sure some of you Tumbleites will know where we are. Or children from the Bronx will remember coming to this place. This was where I had my first earring. I had 3 of them eventually. But yeah, it's strange. I'm coming back in here. I'll give you a quick turn around. I'll tell you where we are, shall I? You see in that back to front, but it's shop. Let's get it right. Shop Trin Gwallt. That's to us Sheila shop. And Sheila shop, I'll go outside and show you in a moment. But if I give you a little twirl around, I'll look at that. In that chair, I believe, or at least in this spot, I had my first earring. So this has left a mark on my life. And many, I suppose, who have had their haircuts here over the years still have their haircuts. I wanted to talk to Sheila tonight, but a little bit short notice, I think, which it was unfair to put her on the spot. And the same with Tracy. But it's brilliant. They've left me have a little look inside the shop for a moment. Can't fault that, can I? Let me turn this around again, because this has a massive impact on a community, you know, when it's like anything. You come here for your haircut maybe once every month, some every 2 weeks. I don't know, when do you have your haircut? When does everybody else have their haircut? How many of you come here still? Any youngsters? I'm a bit gobsmacked. It's good. It's great stuff. Before I make a move, tonight I'm going to be talking about fashion. Fashion, as we call it. I'm going to be talking about dapper, things dapper. How's that sound? Are you with me? Just going to have a look around Tumble then, shall we? If I put this down a second, do I think I need these? I don't think I need these. They're a bit too much for any one person. I'll put them there. That's about as crazy as I get fashion-wise, I suppose. As you can see, hardly any pattern in this. So, dapper, dress to kill. That's what they would say. So, let's go and have a little peep outside so I can show you the actual shop. I'll turn this around and we'll have a look at this fella here, or lady. And let's make our way. So we'll have a look at the front there. So there you have it. Now it might get a bit windy tonight, as normal. I've got a mic on here that should be able to handle it. Whether it does, we shall see. You're probably going to find that this is blowing a gale. And let's have a look back here. So outside the school, this is where we came. So it was behind there. So you'd come down from the school with Mum and you'd have a haircut in Sheila's. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Sheila, for giving me sort of opportunity to come in there tonight. And Tracy, I shall be back at some point in September, possibly, or even between September and November, on another little project, and we'll talk then, I suppose. So, shwmai pawb? How are you all? It's been an excellent week. Busy week for everyone, I'm sure. But it's sun shining. It's Sunday night, and what better to do than go for a little jolly around Tumble and see what Tumble has to offer fashion-wise. Well, it doesn't offer much fashion-wise these days, because it doesn't need it. We have towns, we have cities nearby, and we can travel there near enough these days. Now before, I'd say probably after the World War II, people didn't get around very much back then. Going to town was a big job. So you needed everything in the village. You needed your shoes, you needed haircuts, you needed your woolies. Woolies would be one of the things. Shirts, trousers, and I'll show you some of those places that we used to get those things from. But for a moment, maybe if I turn my attention to this, Good evening, Wayne, Kate, Claire, thank you for joining me, Andrew. Oh, I can go through some names there. Yeah, so come with me and let's have a chat. Let's have a chat about what you remember. Let's see if I can sort of tweak those things in your brain right now and get you to think. And if I turn this in consideration of fashion, now that's an important subject to raise here, I suppose. Clothes banks. They're an important part of society today. Many reasons why. Not that I'm going to divulge too much into those things at the moment, because I think we'll all have sort of political opinions on why those things exist and whether they should exist and how good they are in a community, besides the point. But do you remember, most of our fashions came from our cousins, hand-me-downs. They were cousins, brothers, sisters. Some of you will remember being big families. Let's turn that around. So you remember being part of a big family, possibly, maybe 6 or 7 of you. And you'd get your brothers and sisters. Our brothers would get sisters' clothes just as much as anybody else. I remember having my clothes handed down to me from my cousins, and it was a normal thing. You didn't have clothes banks back then, but you did have the hand-me-down, so it's the same principle. At least now, everything is bought in excess, really, isn't it? And when we don't need things, we tend to put them into the clothes bank, get shot of them, and somebody else gets good use out of them, hopefully. That's the idea. Or they'll even travel to other sides of the world. Now, in the 80s, I'm not sure. I remember the hand-me-downs becoming a bit of an issue by the time you came to about 15, possibly. Your mates had brand new Nike Airs on their feet, or Adidas, or Asics. You didn't want to be wearing hand-me-downs at that stage unless they were good sort of sports stuff. Does anybody remember the high tops, high techs, Nike high tops, pumps, Reebok pumps? There's a sort of an idea for you. Now I'm going to turn the camera just for you to see. Now this, in those windows right there, back in the 90s, I'm sure many of you will remember, before it was a chip shop. Now this is a little bite chip shop now, but back then it used to be the Tumble post office. And in that window there, you would have the latest fashions, and in that window, possibly the same. How many of you remember that? Now I remember the clothes on show there up until about sort of 7 years ago, possibly, give or take a few years, when Heather and staff were running the post office. And they dealt with fashion as well as the post office stuff, and they ran that place for about 20 years. Now, 20 years, possibly even longer, maybe 30 years. Now, I was just talking to Sheila, the hairdresser. She'd been running that place since the early 60s. She'd been running 55 years, I think she said. Now, that's a hell of an achievement. And when I asked her, how does she feel about that? She's not ready to give that up. And neither would I. If I enjoyed a job, which I do, you're not ready to give that up. And I'm glad to hear that she's not ready to give it up. She's part of the community. She's one of the characters that mean a lot to the history of this village. Let me turn this around. So you've got Gwendraeth there. If you go back down here, so this shop here is run by Rian Gwendraeth Evans, I believe, and her daughter Sarah runs the shop there, which is the stylist shop. So another hairdresser. You do need a lot of hairdressers in Tumble, because there's a lot of heads, a lot of big heads in some cases. This one in particular. What I haven't been for yet is treatment in there. Maybe I should. Maybe get my nails done. Sounds good. There's a few on here right now that probably like to get their nails done. Daryl possibly. Now I'm sure most of you on here have already had your nails done. either in Gwendraeth or a couple of other salons that are available in Tumble. Now, the shop that I was in just now, if we turn our thing back, that shop there used to be called Huw Alden. Now that was Sheila's husband, and he used to run that store all through our childhood, where we had videos and our sweets and pasties and that kind of stuff. And then, if you go up a little, like I've pointed out in the past, let's have a look, turn this around again. Now, there you had the bank, Midland, and right next door to it you had the wool shop. Now the wool shop was where many, if I get this working, okay, let's get that down. So your wool shop was a very important shop to have for your fashions. Would you not agree? I mean, your grands and your aunts would knit you gloves, hats, scarves, God forbid, jumpers, socks, and occasionally I imagine somebody knitted something that shouldn't be knitted in wool. But what could that be? Imagine a pair of woolly pants or something. I don't know. Now, there's a lot more stores that people could tell me about on here. Now, this was an ironmonger's, as I've pointed out before, but I wonder if there was any shops. Should my Tina? What do you think about the fashion in Tumble? So, yeah, you had shops up and down the whole high street who would sell different things, but the one thing that really sort of stands out in the history of Tumble for me, and many who come from this place who have passed through it, was the fact that it had 2 shoe shops. And not just 2 shoe shops, 2 of the best shoe shops in the whole country, where people would come from miles around in order to get their feet fitted, alright, would get their feet fitted for a brand new pair of, what do you want to call them, skids? Do the kids call them skids? I don't think they do. So, what do kids call shoes these days? Daps? Who calls them daps? Mum and Dad always call them that. Go and get your daps. We're off. We're going out for the day. Go and put your daps on. Or what's another one? There's another one that I remember. Or I tend to forget at this stage. Good evening, Helen, Michael, Emily, Janet, Leah. Give me some Welsh sayings. Do we have any Welsh sayings? Cyrriol, Dapsna. That's all I remember. Why do I... Somebody help me out here. There must be some shoe sayings that some of you remember. Not only that, what about when you were all dressed up, ready to, get out there and sort of go on the town, go to church, go to school discos or whatever you go into. If I pull back here a moment, because it's important to do that for road safety. Yeah, so I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but any sort of sayings for clothes, being dressed up, dressed to kill, do you know when you think about, or being dapper, posh, smart, that's what I always remember with a rolling R. I always remember somebody telling me when we were kids, ti'n dwysgol na smart boy. And when somebody told you that, it was serious business. You were dressed to kill. Dapper, my friend, not daps. You weren't wearing daps, you're just dapper. That means you were dressed to kill, looking good, ready to go. Hit the town. Now give me some Welsh sayings. I want to hear some Welsh sayings. For some reason, everything escapes me. Shouldn't do. Now in the background there, as you can see, is probably something we should go and have a look at, shouldn't we? How many of you remember buying clothes off a catalogue? Now, the saying is, in Tumble, you didn't need catalogues. You didn't even need catalogues when you needed catalogues. I remember buying clothes, sportswear, that were fashionable from people's houses. People, let's not ask where they came from. Just picture Arthur Daly, Del Boy, possibly. I remember that kind of thing going on in most streets where somebody was dealing in the sports goods department. And that's where you got some of your things before the catalogue, or catalogue still runs these days, I assume. But if you wanted a pair of Nikes, you had to buy them off a catalogue. These things were like 80 quid back in the 80s. Nobody was going to do that, were they? So let's have a look here. I was just reading about this part in Tumble and how people used to catch a bus, and it's something I want to come back to, just to catch buses. But this didn't come until later on, like the 60s, when Gwyn Williams and Williams brothers, I think. Memory's gone. Good evening, Annalise. Let's have a look. I have some notes here to help me remember stuff. It doesn't work. Let's have a look. So, yeah, another one to point out, I suppose, would be Woodell the barber, who worked, I think the shop ran for like 90 to 100 years. That's what I remember him telling me, and I don't think I'm wrong. I think from the whole time Tumble was running as a mining village, Waddell, the barber at the top of the village, which I have photographs of, he operated there for most of his life, and his father before him. So, you know, Tumble needed its smart cuts, and it was people like this that gave us the sort of fashion. And as you can see, I get my fashion sense from my fellow Tumblians, who like to keep it smart. Smarter diawl, good boy. Now, I'm sure there's many people who are watching at some point or another that can fill in the gaps, tell us where all the fashion outlets are. Where else was dealing in clothes, shoes, haircuts? We've got Marie up the top, who's still there, right by the club. We've probably got a few more that I'm forgetting at this stage. But these guys have operated in small salons, you know, that were local, small buildings, and you know, they kept those businesses going for over 50 years in some cases, like Sheila herself. Shemai Carl, Elizabeth, thanks for joining me. Now, without further ado, we are going to go in to this place. Let me turn this around. Now, this place has some serious history. One of two footwear stores in the community. And not only that, I remember climbing these railings when we were kids. Now, we know it as not Esgidiau Cwm, but as Green Hill. And Green Hill had some of the best views. Not had, still has. I mean, that itself is a great view. It's the Workingmen's Club in Tumble. That's where we go for our jolly outings. And that there is Railway Terrace, or as it used to be known. And over there is Tisha Road and Tirbeca, as we visited a few weeks back. Should my Nigel, Mandy, thanks for joining me. So, like I said, history in this place is as rich as it comes. But let's go and find out how rich it is for this place, shall we? I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to turn this around while I have a moment, and while it's not disrupting anybody else. I'm sorry for any noise it may cause in the meantime. What I'm doing is turning the mic to a more suitable position. Any issues there, let me know, please. Much appreciated. Now, when you stand at the top of this place and you look down on this, it looks glorious, and it's a real sight. Let's see if we're open, ready to have a chat possibly. We're open. Ar agor, ni ar agor. Dewch yn I fe mewn. Oh wow, I can't even describe. The smell of this place is absolutely wonderful. I can smell the leather, and it reminds me of when we were kids. Let's have a look around. It's got a very traditional look about the shop.
I'll just go get Huw now, every second.
Okay, thank you. So, look at those. The glass case. Amazing. So this is a shop that sort of supplies all kinds of fashions. It's not limited. It's the kind of shop you'd sort of expect to be very traditional. It looks very traditional. If we go through here, to see Lynn of shoes. How amazing is that? And then your customers will be sitting here, get your feet fitted. Some of the classy lady stuff here. Amazing. Let's go and have a chat, shall we? Wel, sydd mae Huw?
Iawn.
Ti'n iawn? Nes i cwrdd â ti.
Right.
So ni wedi cwrdd â o blaen. We haven't met before.
No.
Welsh or English?
Cymraeg.
Cymraeg, yeah.
Well,
Well, we'll speak English for the sort of people who are watching. But yeah, it's nice. How long have you run this place then?
my grandfather was here, so
Was it?
over 100 years.
100 years. So this has been in the family for 100 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Between I would say something 1911, 1912, something like that. I think I'm down. I think I moved down wholesale by about 1913. Yeah, my father's born here in 1922.
So it used to be another shop, but before then, didn't it? It's always
no.
operated as a shoe shop.
I remember it when the bridge was here and the road was narrower here, and on the front there was a garage and there was a shopwife Creed, a cobbler shop.
Yeah.
So that was right on the end, and they had cobblers. They all lived here as well, I think, because I think it was a cousin or whatever. And bottom part of this was a house when I was a boy. No, I was told it was started to be built as a pub, became a post office first.
Yes, I have read that. It
Yeah,
was a post
I'm not sure if there was they had a monkey on the bar or something.
Was it?
Yeah, somebody told me. So, and then, my father opened this up in the 60s, and I came back 20 odd years, more than that, gosh.
So you've been brought up here then, I assume?
Yes.
So you were a boy living here, and
but I went away young. I was away in school and then college, and I was in Tenby for years and things like that. And my father fell ill effectively, and I came back to take over quickly.
Was it something you expected to be taken over?
Not really. No choice in the matter. My mum died quite young, and so he's on his own, and then the car crash, also very quickly, so it was a case of having to drop everything, and I couldn't. I had a flat down there. It was different, and he was familiar, and he had Alzheimer's, and within a few years he was downhill very quickly, really. And then it was a case of having to take it on and redo the building and do everything. And then the top house was a separate house. I think that family actually owned the whole lot initially.
Wow.
And sort of bought that, and
did
so we
the
lived in
owner
there.
move away to some other part of the country? Or
No.
I remember reading something in a recent.
No,
I'll find out more about
yeah,
that.
I don't think so. We've been the family owned it. The Joes. I mean, they've scattered around. There's still some come to the shop. That I originally not sure quite what the whole story was, but I do remember lots of things. In Tumble as a small boy, and sort of it was a lot more there's a lot more small shops here and things like that. And they had when there was club accounts, big accounts. I've got the ledgers going back to the turn of the century, not far off the turn of the last century, sort of where I think what happened with the mines and things like that, quite often the coal board or whatever, they'd have their own shops and everything, and you basically never saw your money. It went straight into the shop.
Yes. So
people like my sort of grandparents, fought against it and came down with a business from Cardiganshire. My great grandfather was killed in the Klondike out in Alaska, and he and his daughter, an eldest daughter, I think, she came down with a husband who was a cobbler, I think, in Cwm or something like that, or Clandestin in that area. And they sort of, I'm not sure if they sold the farm that my grandfather built after coming back from the Klondike, and sort of people used to come here for holidays because there's money here, because there's wealth in the respect there was industry, and Cardigan as well had been affected just like Ireland with the potato farming and things like this, from what I can gather.
Yeah.
So this was a place to visit, and then it was a bit of an adventure at the time,
Yeah.
And you had the lodging. I remember the lodging house behind the church here.
Yes, I've read about it. Apparently, the Tumble Workingmen's Club was meant to be a hotel at one point.
It could be. I know there was I think there was a hotel in Llety is a hotel, isn't it?
Yes,
so
yeah.
the farm, Llety Farm, there's a hotel there. There's a chap I know in Tenby, and his mother's family come from Cwm, but they first came here and to the Llety.
Yes, I've read that.
Yeah, so there's lots of things, as I say, I remember I used to have a few more, I'm sure there's a chippy then, I remember a sweet shop there, and there's somebody selling, I think it was to the front room as a part-time. The husband would be out at work all the time, and they'd be in, have a small business, and the butcheries and all that, the butcher on the top and things like that.
Do you remember any fashion outlets, anything selling clothes or anything?
Well, there was a shop Teal'wr here, which they made clothes. My aunt was married to one of the brothers, but the father ran it, where Gwendraeth is now.
Yeah.
And but they could make a whole suit from scratch. It was really clever, stuff, and I did have a suit oddly enough left over, so which was I'd inherited. It was different what they do now, a proper job, and that was where Gwendraeth was, and then it came George Thomas Insurance, I think, and then it became Gwendraeth. Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I was just looking at that now and thinking, where else were some of these outlets? So that's good to know.
Yeah,
that would have been a tailor back in the day. That was a
tailor all the way through.
And they would probably have made a fortune back in the day when the miners were working.
Well, that's it. You see, they'd have the Sunday school. Thing is, things have changed. I remember as Easter'd come and you have to have your clothes for church and chapel. So that was a big time. Christmas is a big time, but sort of things have changed in that respect now. It's not so much. We're massive now back to school, but then they come from 50, 60 miles. They'll come all across South Wales here.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. How far do they actually travel?
So we've had people from Machynlleth and and across, and we I took Eva to Legoland a few years ago, and when she was a bit younger, and Lisa fell down a slide, and this woman came and looked down, and she was locally from down there. So you're from the shoe shop, aren't you? And I was down in Legoland, which is strange, but I think they've obviously got reasons for coming down here, family or friends or whatever. We do get people doing in the summer calling, but all of Pembrokeshire and Cardiganshire.
Well, I have spoken to people who have come from way off that have come to Tumble specifically just to come to this shop.
Yeah.
Now, how did you find? Because I was speaking to Erica the other day. That you had two shoe shops, like you would have needed that back in the mining days. Did you find that was a bit of competition towards the 80s? Possibly.
I think it was. It was different. It's different for us because I think my father fell ill. Well, let me think. My mum died in the early 80s, so that made my father then tone things down a bit. So he's quite happy on his own running it, and cutting down. He couldn't cope with the children and all that business as it was then. The shop had a shop in Pontyberem as well during the war, between the wars.
Oh wow!
My aunt then, I think, was down there as a younger, running that. But then that all closed up. But my grandmother died. I think that's what, and she was a sort of, behind a lot of the business. That she passed away quite young. I think my grandfather remarried for a short time. But of course, all the boys were away in the war. There's 4 brothers and 2 sisters. And they were all in the war. One was in a prisoner of war camp, and my father was out in Japan and Burma and things like that. Another one was in the Merchant Navy, but he was in the St. Lawrence Sea. So when they were, the subs all sank all the ships, but he got through that. Another uncle then was an artist, and he was a camouflage officer. He was doing the camouflage for the Midlands from the air. And then I think he'd had enough of that, and he felt, he should join the cause, and he sort of ended up in South Africa and lived out in South Africa teaching art before he came back, things like that.
No shoe shops out there then?
No shoe shops out there, no, all arrived into different, one was banking, one was, my uncle came out of the Merchant Navy, and my father, so they set up a shop in Llandilo in the 60s, into the 70s, and then he retired in the 70s, and he lived in, he came back to live in, but his health wasn't good. In Pen Park, the one down from Pen Park, Halo Park, opposite the church, the entrance of the park. So So
this place, the family business has survived quite a lot then.
Oh
really,
heck yeah! And they all lived here. It was remarkable because it was a double house and things like that. But you had people who had worked in the house as well.
Yeah.
But it was being exceptional in the rounds, because the rounds. I remember my father. I go out to do a bit, but my father would be out 2 days a week, morning till night, down to Pontypridd, above to Penrose and Gwendraeth, and the whole area, used to be, and it was much harder in those days. There's door to door all the way around the place.
So you'd go out door to door, and sales.
Well, collecting money. They'd have the shoes, or they'd pay. Some would pay in, but some would pay on credit, rather, because no credit card or anything then. And of course, when you had strikes and things, they were stuffed. As well. I remember one of the bank managers down here, they called him the man, his friend, because he's really looked after them, because not many did, and I remember somebody coming to me and thanking me for my grandmother during the war, because they had no money, the children were going, and they'd give them credit to have the kids fed, and waiting for the money and things, so it was, and there was a lot of that. There was, I suppose, different community, and they were all very, for my father, I think my grandfather was a deacon in Bethel. But my grandmother went, and she's a very strong person. She went to Bethesda, she's independent, and so my father and his brother, they had to go to both, I think. So, and I only broke my leg in Bethesda, so I fractured my femur then at Sunday school. I remember that. It was typical. It was different times. There was, since the Thatcher did it, she stopped, Sunday openings and all that, but and then they kill the chapels off, and whatever you can say about chapel religion, it did give a structure to the families and things like that, and help, and when they need, the people in need and things like this, and it's sad to see that it's all gone in that respect, not that I'm not being hypocritical, because I wouldn't have been, there every day, but I think we have lost something from it, and of course here there's Ebenezer here, and he was a big chapel. And Tom Nevin, they did a TV program on it years ago. He was a preacher there, and then he was thrown out, and he was over in Llanelin then. But then he went back. But they used to have preach on where Rebecca was. They'd have several thousand listening to preaching, but these were like the pop stars of the day. These guys were very articulate,
they are
clever
known
boys.
to have changed and shaped this village.
Oh, definitely.
Massive influences.
Huge influence. And probably they kept the Welsh language alive in lots of ways, because there's so much, with the Welsh not, and there's so much against it, and it gave people a need for education, and if you across England, a heck of a lot of most schools that teachers were Welsh, because the parents had struggled and strived to get their children to be educated, and they literally, if you talk to people, it's I had a Miss Jones or a Mr. Davies or Thomas, there's so much of that.
I think that might have been a conscious decision based on some of the stuff. When the Welsh Not was about, they used to actually bring teachers in from Bristol and Manchester just to enforce the English language. Yes. So that that must have had a huge influence on things in terms of Welsh teachers coming in later on. I know as my grandmother was exceptionally very active about things like that she spoke to people, and she was very anti-war. Her brother who killed my younger brother and he lived here as well, and he was killed in the Somme, and he was a teacher. He just started teaching in Tumble school. Oh wow!
I think his name's up in the memorial there and things in the school, and but he was 19-year-old, and he was killed out there, and I've got the letters, and I only received them a couple of years ago, and I can't remember who gave them to. One of the, so I was the youngest of the family, so it was sort of, very poignant reading. You read, and he'd lost friends in the coming weeks. They were also having, you could see it was craftily written, because they were censored. And being Welsh, you'd have a bit more censorship probably than because your heart would be with Wales as much as anywhere, and so you had to be. They were very. It was disguised somewhat. I felt as a disguise, because I knew how my grandmother felt. I'd never met her, but I heard how she felt. I felt about all these things, So, and it was. So I'm just reading through it, but God, that was pretty poignant stuff. It's.
In terms of sort of history, because I'm looking at this place now, has it changed much? Because when we look around, you get a sense of
that knocked
how
through.
It might have been.
Yeah, that was. I remember this with this block. Then you'd have boots hobnail boots for the works, and they'd be hanging from the ceiling, and Wellingtons hanging. And then you'd have stores in across around the back, I suppose. And in the front, I mean, the shop, the buildings out the front, it was actually in a funny sort of way more picturesque or something, because the back, there was no wall across the way, across where the church is. That was a embankment coming down, and of course the railway bridge was here. You'd have to walk. I walked to school under that with no pavement. And
do you remember what year that got taken down?
68, 69. I've got a picture.
I have here that it's 68, but there's always sort of a mixed response on it.
It's around that. I was in primary school. And I must have been I was early past primary school then, and I remember Morris Motors. You saw these big lorries coming down, the double deckers. If they didn't take it at a certain angle, they get stuck underneath. So they have to lower the tyres and things like that. It wasn't particularly high, And I've got my uncle did a picture, an etching of it back 1930s and 40s, and I've got and I got a draw. I'm sure I've got some drawing and a photograph somewhere as well. And that it was like, because this is bottom. I went at bottom summer school, not Clickavedic. Once you came halfway up High Street, you didn't know each other barely. It's strange, and but having to go through there, it was looking back, or you go over the top and down the back streets. But again, you probably pop off to a shop. The shop in Pen Park, Railway Terrace. It was then.
Yeah.
And of course, Hale and Neuadd was called Caldy View. And you could,
yes.
And you can't call it Caldy View because there's no view. You can see Caldy from here, and up the top of High Street there's 1,000 Hale Bridge there, a fantastic square-on picture of Caldy. Here you can just about see it from the bathroom, and when I was a boy, they had the lighthouse. The light used to reflect round, and you could see the light. Of course, now it just flashes out, strobes out to sea. But you could see the lights flashing. And my uncles, they were in 1936 or something, they reckon they could see the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis from Tumble. Because of course there was no light pollution in those days, but there was exceptional climate or something at the time, and you could see it here. Which
that's something else, isn't it?
It is. And they so a cousin of mine died in London last year, and he was the eldest, and I used to get all my information off him. I think it was great because I wish I'd written a lot of it down, because when I was younger, you don't think when you're younger, do you?
No.
And then you start appreciating things, and he was fond of information. He used to say, like, when my uncle was here, Dylan Thomas used to come here.
Wow.
And because he went to our college in Swansea, and then he was so good, they effectively within a year sent him to the Royal College in London, and there was a Cadoma crew and all that business, and he sort of knew him. And my grandmother used to say, here he comes. He had an apple and a clean shirt. Never, just bought another clean shirt, but he always want food, so you'd have to feed him or whatever, and that's how they do. They went around, It's like the old poets, and I think one of the stories was that they ended up in London, and they got off at London, but he was so drunk that he stayed on and came back to Swansea on the train. He never woke up, So
that's believable as well.
It is. So it's and I think there were a bunch of characters, the boys. There was the four brothers then, and five brothers, I should say.
So how do you, in terms of, do you have a website?
I do. I built a website a couple of years ago. It's maintaining it is the problem. So we try and do a bit of Facebook, but I'm not particularly.
Maybe that helps things a bit.
It does.
Facebook.
It's people. It's word of mouth as much. The hospitals tend to recommend us as well, and the podiatries. So they we get a lot of referrals from anyone with slight problem, especially the children. They walk in. You've got to go on a better shoe then to. Keep them happy, and then once they find you, they keep on coming back.
I think that's the key.
I had somebody here was a pal of mine from Milford, and somebody came in the other day, and I remember staying in the house when I was a youngster. I think that's just, I didn't recognise him because years has gone by. It's his elder sister and things like that. And I was, I kept looking. I looked familiar, and then her husband came in from. I remember him, things like that. And so, it's surprising how far people will travel. So and I said, I've seen a lot of changes here coming back and forth, you know, and it's surprising how much things haven't changed. And I remember the mines can hydrate closing and all that business. I think I remember, well, that is imagination. I remember the Great Mountain just about. I remember playing there, you know, because there was the baths in the bars then, and we'd be up the tips, and you'd have all the old conveyor belt, you know, the belts, the rubber belts. That's why we slides on zinc, you know, dangerous as hell. I lost all my clothes in the Pellamon there once.
Pillamon, there's a word I've lived for.
It's dangerous stuff. It's like sinky sand, and I changed in the back and hid my clothes in the kitchen, in the outside toilet, and my mother found them and had to burn them all, and I was yes, I didn't sit down for a week, I think, and and I remember another one. I had to one Saturday night. I had to read in Bethesda Chapel or something on a Sunday morning, which I wasn't particularly keen to do, so I cut my hair. But I was sat behind my mother, and we had the same colour hair at the time, and I sort of on the bank, you know, and that's all she saw was hair falling down. So she thought I'd chopped her hair off, and I had a hell of a whack, you know. And then they looked, I was, oh my God, what have you done? So I was up in Waddle, 8 o'clock, you're still open, 8 o'clock at night, and he shaved me. So I had to go completely shaved, so I've kept the look ever since. So I remember going past there once, and there was two old boys outside, and I said, do you know, I went in asking for a trim, and I've come out looking like Kojak, you know.
He had quite a repetition for haircuts,
quite stern, you know, and he's had all the flames. And
he was a heck of a character.
He's a personality. He was very much. I don't remember where there's a snooker club at the top. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
And he used to be, and there used to be toy manufacturer. There was a toy suppliers there then, but they Van Pratt's. Yeah, but they used it as a warehouse or for gifts for the beach and all that sort of business. You know, there's a few shops. There were a few other shops. I was thinking, and when I listened to you a few weeks before I went away, and you was struggling with shops, and there was a considerable few things I could remember. There's the road. There's a few shops, you know. And,
so have you.
Francis, and Harold Francis there was related to the post office in Salon, so they were brothers. That's right, and so there's a shop over there. Not that, you know, obviously I wouldn't have gone into every type of shop, you know. Harry Jones here was great on the opposite, across the road, but down, you know, the house here opposite the club there.
Oh yes.
But that used to be, you know, there used to be like you had a forecourt, a raised balcony, basically, wooden balcony. Went into one side for groceries, and into the other part for hardware, and steptoe was across the road. And so Steptoe did everything sort of, and then I had somebody called from with me and give me a picture. I got that somewhere of where the vet is now, and I was shop Newydd.
Wasn't that the wool shop?
The wool shop, the Pound, and they were going back. I remember Mrs. Pound, Pound, as far as I remember, but they were going back a generation further. And there's a picture of a horse outside and things like that, you know, and I've got it somewhere. It's they were from North Wales, I think. They came down and they researching the family, you know.
It's a phenomenal history.
It grew very quick. I mean, it's a very new village, Tumble. It's not exactly.
Well, from my gathering, it's something like 400 years old in terms of its agricultural history.
Yes, yeah, the farms.
But then it's industrial. That came about in the late 1800s, or mid 1800s.
Yeah.
But this shop has been here since that.
This would be 1880 something like that. This is one of the oldest in the village. Yeah. But you got Hirwaun Forge, which is very old. Tumble Hotel was old, which they should never have knocked down. But it's ridiculous, you know. And so the Hirwaun Forge is pretty old. I think there'd be odd house, which might have been, you know, on the edge would have been farm housing again near Hirwaun Forge. You've got a house across the road. I have got a picture of someone as well. As you go down to Pontyberem from Cwm there, and the crossroads that come back into there's the road there. And that was, you know, that looks quite an old little area there as well, you know. So I think it was sectional. I think the Graig must have been, Atleti must have been quite old as well, parts of that around there, you know. But it sort of, you know, developed, and I think they built a lot of extra houses in the 60s in there, I think, you know, for Rosnewydd and all that. I think that was fairly, no,
Yeah,
it was earlier than that, perhaps.
That would be the Bronx.
Yeah, the Bronx, yes, I remember that well. Gosh, yes. I used to be down there, that's where I'd go down, you know, because I was from Descendant.
Yeah.
That's where we'd play, you know, down the end there, and in the river, Avongoch.
So were the kids naughty back then?
Oh, crikey, one or two. They're still, and if they're alive, they still are now. Some of them. Yeah, oh, it was bonkers, really. Different times. I remember waking up, you know, living here and seeing fighting in the club, you know, some nights, but it was massive. The club was there was some. Well, I don't know if it's true that that's where Max Boyce he came here as in a comedy act, and Tumble had won the cup or something that day. No one was listening to him, and that's where he got the idea to change everything into a rugby connotation, and that's how he started his rugby comedy.
So Tumble has a lot to do with his whole
career after that, you know, because of that.
We'll have that. We can take that.
We can. And you need some humour there as well sometimes. I had, you know, but there was, God, there used to be a lot of fighting and things. You know, it was a different mentality. You know, I think that they worked bloody hard. You know, they were in dangerous conditions. You know, cruel conditions at times. I had a cousin, my dad, who died last year, and she was saying, I think it was her father or her cousin's father. Didn't quite. There's so much information coming into me, but she was telling me that her husband had an accident at work, you know, a scratch or something, and dust had gone in there. Not a husband, a father. I think it was a father, and or an uncle, and he went up, and of course he, you know, he was all right. He seemed to be all right, but then he got infected sepsis, I suppose, and died. And he had 3 kids and a wife, you know, young wife, you know, 3 kids, and they went up in front of the board, and there was a doctor there, and he said, yes, it is work related, but there was also an NCB guy and somebody else independent supposed to be, but you know, they probably paid, hadn't they? And she had nothing. So he had three children. So the family, because we had a bit of family down here. There was farm here, and I think they were scattered around. So I think the whole family sort of. She went to help, and that's how it kept them alive. Was, you know, because there was nothing. She was left with 3 kids and no work and nothing, you know. So I think the family and people helped, and the chapel probably helped and things like that. So
again, that's something the community has always been good for.
Yes, yeah.
I can't say if it's exactly the same as it was then. I think it was probably a lot stronger in those days, I'm sure.
It was, you know. Yeah. I mean, there was those who did and those who didn't, as always, you know. But it was in those situations, it's pretty cruel. And as I say, when there were strikes on and things, you know, and I think, if I'm right, another aunt who was quite a character, she was brilliant, and she married, and her husband and all her brothers were up in Seven Sisters, and they all went out to I know she ended up in Seven Sisters, I'm not quite sure where they were from, but they went out on a contract to Canada and it dried up and it fell through, and they had to come back, and of course they had no work, nothing, and so the only way they could get work was take a contract out with the NCB down here, what it was, Coal Board then or whatever, and they had to dig through, you know, from one shaft to another, and it's full of silicon, and I think they were all dead within very short, you know, within 6 years they were all dead, you know, all the family, you know, and which is pretty grim, wasn't it, you know? Yeah. I was looking at something on Must Take the other day about a young girl getting killed because she was down the mine, and they sent the trolleys down, and one axe was sticking out or something, caught her in the head and decapitated her. And another about a chap, I think it was on that Fishlock walk thing. He was a young lad, was youngster, you know, just started 16 or whatever, might have been younger, and he got killed, and they took the body in a bag because in bits, you know, back to the house, and there's no one there, so just left in the front door, you know, the front door type of thing, you know. And
it's a gruesome thing. What about minding then? So you know, that was never on the cards for yourself, I imagine, having a business like this in the family. No, I wouldn't. My grandfather was killed in the Klondike, but then they think he was murdered because he could read and write. He took on
because up in the Clonard, what happened? A lot of the Californian gold rush, the crooks and everything came up to take advantage of everything, and he defended and looked at people and things like that. And he came out back once. He was 40 going. He did the Skagway Pass, and I don't know if you've seen that film. The guy from The Bodyguard was on the series on the other day, and he did all that, and he did it twice.
Not the hard film, McCoy's.
No, there is another, and there is something with he met. Tell you he met was, and it's in the film with Kevin Costner. And the family apparently from Ryder, Wide Up. Because Wide Up, after the going for he went up, actually did go up into Alaska for his latter years with his girlfriend, and apparently he met them up there, and I've got a newspaper clipping of John Davis to die, and then a picture of a coffin, of him waiting, because he went back the second time. He came back, he put the farm, contributed a big lot of money to a chapel that helped his family of settling the Searle in Horeb, and he bought this house and everything, and set them all up, and it was all down to he'd meat dealing business going over to Merthyr, back and forth, and he was let down with debt and things, and he was left with nothing, so him and a brother, I think, and there was a flick of the straw, and he took the straw, and he took the short straw, and out he went. And then he went out again the second time, but he owned mines and everything, but nothing came back. If you didn't declare it within 24 hours, and we were over here, the family would have been over here, there's no chance, everything was gone, And but a cousin of my dad, he went out a couple of years ago, and you go to this museum, it's right in the middle of nowhere, it's a wilderness, it's this thing. And he mentioned where he was. Oh, I've got his workbooks here and his stuff here. Still there now in the museum out there, It's just,
that's absolutely amazing history.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And he lost part of a year. He carried a knife and a Bible, and he had he'd actually when he was transporting meat, he was attacked by highwaymen back here, and he fought them off with an axe. When he was unloading the meat at the end, there's a hand amongst it. And but he lost a year, and he was out on the tundra and looking, trying to get shelter, and he found some shelter. And when he woke up in the morning, what he'd sheltered under was a coffin, because the ground until the permafrost melts, they can't. It's too hard to bury anything, so they leave him up in the trees and things like this, and then they bury it when the spring comes, and the ground melts a bit. But the thing is, he got frostbite and lost part of his ear and things like that night. But remarkable. The history. There's a book being written about him, and they were going to do a film about him a couple of years ago. But the Canadians came over. But my dad's cousin, he was in police and things like that. And he did a lot of work around here on, I think when he retired for SOC on sort of investigative on murders and things like this. It was, but he passed. Roy, he passed away, and it was a shame really, because he was the one that was the leading light behind pushing it and he knew quite a bit about it. Although there were bits and pieces that I never managed to pass over to him, and this cousin-in-law, he gave me a lot of information which which wasn't in the book and things like that.
There's never enough time.
There isn't.
No.
And you think, I wish this is the best way to do it, because you need to. It's no good, because I enjoy his story. Just give me a brandy there or something. I'll sit there. I'll try talk on it. Lovely, But if you don't record it, you forgot it the next day. I used to go up to stay with him in London sometimes, and he'd sit there and he'd be there 4 a.m, and he'd be going on about all. I would not go. I'd listen to all he had to say. And I was having a drink going off. Oh my God! The next day, I'd be dying. I would be leaving till the next evening, because I'd to stop 10 times for a kip.
If there's any sort of feature, would there be any features of this shop you'd like to show us? In terms of, is there something you feel, that's something very unusual or different, or is
it's all been pretty well. They wrecked back in the 60s and 70s. I think there was nothing particularly. It's a massive stores and footwear and things like that.
How many shoes do you think you keep in this place?
God knows, it's frightening, because we do from a small size babies 2 to a men's 16. So it's sort of, and you've got fittings as well. There's no one probably and especially the children's in South Wales with as much stock, you know. And so I'd be hard pressed in England to find a shop with so much stock as far as sizing and fittings.
I saw baby shoes here earlier, tiny little trendy shoes.
So
I'm not sure where I saw them, but they're probably the smallest shoes I'd ever seen.
Oh gosh, and you know, people dress up, you know. And as I said, they used to dress up for church and for, you know, for Easter, but nowadays people have something for everything, you know.
Yeah.
And it's all from a lot of it is from Portugal, Spain, Italy.
Do they come that
Germany.
far? Do they?
Oh no, the footwear. We don't manufacture anymore. Anything. It's not much decent. But you get some of the bros, the men's bros, Barkers and things like that. You know, that's lovely stuff. That is.
Yeah, they're looking rather posh.
Yeah.
Dapper, we'd call that.
Stuff.
Do you have any sort of no? Then what would you call? You know, when we were kids, they'd call, oh, where's your daps? Put your daps on.
Trainers. Yeah, we do sketch. It's very difficult because we do sketchers and geoc. Geocs are probably sketchers. They're an everyday trainer, if you like. You know, nice stuff, good for the summer and things. Geocs are a bit more structured, and they do shoes as well. They're very clever stuff because they've got they're Italian. And they're leather lined, and they've got air breathable soles and things like that, so the water can't get in but air can and things like that. So, you know, they're quite technically strong, and they're quite a stronger shoe. So quite often, you know, little kids need a bit more structure because you know, things like Crocs and things are fine for wearing down the beach and things, but not for wearing all the time. So what happens is the feet tend to spread and they can't get into a shoe at the end of but they went back to school, they can barely get their feet in.
Would that be an actual problem for that?
Oh gosh, yeah.
See, that's interesting to learn. I've never heard of that.
You know, they're there. You know, they're there for wearing occasionally. Same with the skulls. You know, the skulls. They used to say to you, "Oh, skulls are great for you," but you're only supposed to wear them for a couple of hours to massage, to relax the feet and things like that. You know,
there's a science behind this.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of different. There's a lot of problem with hypermobility. You know, so you need a bit more support. I mean, the Echo, we do Danish, the Echo stuff, which they were the only ones in Wales doing it, and and they've got a slightly higher back, so it's more supportive. You know, there's a lot into it. Children grow so quickly. We try and give as much growing space as possible, but some children grow absolutely daft. My daughter, we went to a wedding. You know, we got her parent for go to the wedding, and she'd grown. By the time it came in, she'd already grown a size. And then we got her another pair, because we hadn't gone, and luckily in time got there, and in a month she'd grown out. But after that, she didn't grow for almost a year. So some kids can be like constant fat, you know, but you know where you are with them. But then the ones that are spurting, it's very difficult.
Is there any chance that by the time you're in your 40s that your feet can grow a size? They can see swell their width sometimes. You know, it depends on what you know, the belly and everything else. And people have, you know, they swell as well. You know, it depends on their health. And so we're just putting people in Tumble's mind at rest.
Yeah,
you grow overnight. Like me, for instance, I went from a 10 to 11.
Now I'll tell you one thing with a 10 to 11. You're in a funny spot there. There's so much stuff being made on continental sizes and things like this, and they do lose a size occasionally. So quite often they say it's a 10 and it's not.
Oh right. Because
it's a 44. Well, a 44 isn't a true 10. It should be like 9.5. You know, sort of that. Because the Continentals are now, you know, they're manufacturing everything, and they might sell them as with UK sizes, but not necessarily. It's the same with the 40 and 40. Between the 40 and 40, they lose a size occasionally, but around about the 2, around about the 6.5, 6, and then again around the 10. So they might be selling them as 10s,
right.
And they're not actually 10s.
Yeah, so you've got to keep an eye on those things.
There's lots
so
of things
it's
you
good
wouldn't
to have your feet measured then.
It is. I mean, especially for children, and you've got to try them on. You know, it's bonkers not trying them on. You know, and especially with the kids, because there's a lot of things. You know, some children, they have a lot of puppy flat when they start walking and growing, but with, you know, they quite often grow out of that, but they will need a wider shoe. And things like a T-bar helps to get the foot in if they've got a high instep, because some have got high insteps. A foot isn't a block of wood. It's effectively, it can be, you know, it can be different in different parts of the foot. It can be wider in the front. I'm like a duck. I'm wide in the front and narrow in the back. So very few slip-ons I can wear because I come out, you know, but I need the width, you know. So it's been a bit unfortunate that, but so I'm stuck to my laces.
What's the best slang you've heard for shoes?
It's slang.
Yeah, no, for instance, if you think of the DAP, or your slip-ons, or whatever, if any Welsh terms, any sort of skids, for instance, put your skids on.
Oh, I know the kids go. Those kids are pants, aren't
they? I think that's an American.
Oh, that is. It was the sliders. Everybody was just sliders. They like the sliders now. And then daps we used to say, but pumps and daps, isn't it? I remember that. And then you. It was the brothel creepers. Remember the brothel creepers?
No, I don't. I remember moccasins.
Moccasins, yeah. You had the. There was something else. The big toes. I remember having some with a really big toe. Dreadful, really. You could kick a football, but then you break your ankle as you land. They're the wedges. You had the wedges, and just after a brothel creeper is almost like a continuous wedge through a bottom of the. Now back in the 70s, 80s, the 70s around, and they are still about occasionally. They've got it's like a continuous. It's a flat sole, so there's no heel or anything right way through. But there is a bit of a lift, and they're quite often ribbed on the side, so we used to call them brothel creepers. Not that I took her to trying him out or anything like that. And,
do you remember pumps, Reebok pumps, for instance? Remember the fads and trainers and stuff? When we were kids in the 90s, if you didn't have a pair of Nike,
it's like that now.
So the kids are the same.
Oh, it's bonkers. I remember coming back to help my father, and we had LA Gear then, which is a big brand, which actually I think the owners of Skechers are LA Gear, I think. And I remember two boys coming in here and they were going to the Gwendraeth and they were, have you got a pair of LA Gear? I said, yeah. I said, this is then £70-80, they're quite pricey. And I said, but haven't you got anything over 100? So they're competing on who had the most It's like they do with the phones now. Yeah. Because you have to have the X phone and this and that, and you have to have the iPhones and things, and sometimes it doesn't make any sense at all. It's purely because it's the brand to be seen with. And unfortunately what's happened with things like Nike and things like that, they've pulled out of supplying people bar some very big, because it cuts their costs down dramatically and things like that. But then wait till they go bust and then they'll be they lose it all. But that's what happens. They put all their eggs in one basket, and they're not particularly we're only a small country in comparison to the States, from population wise, and they're actually recently they've just cut down out on all this. But I think they're only supplying 3 now, and 3 actual supplies in the UK, which is pretty grim, really.
Bring back the high techs then, the high tech.
High tech,
the big tongues. And
the high techs. There was nothing much wrong. High tech squash. But then again, multiples in the high street, they all live in shops like that, if you remember them. They always, there was a high-tech squash we did for about $26.99. No, $21.99 for the brand, and plus 4 or whatever for 26. Now, bear in mind, they wouldn't have gone up much more. And this is 20 or 30 years ago. They're probably not that much more now. They're about 30, 40, they've only been in the 30s now, which is, they've hardly gone up. But I couldn't understand. I'm going to places like Macros at the time and say, how come they got these? I can't sell them at this sort of price, 99. But then you look at them, and they manufacture them for that price. So they take all the innards, all the support out, and things like that. So it's not the same product. It looks the same product, but all the goodness of it has gone out of it to bring it under price. And I think there has been a problem in we want everything for nothing. It's like. But then again, somebody's paying for it somewhere. So whether it's in the Far East and you've got child labour, or and they're all doing it, whatever they say, or whatever. Somebody's having to pay for it somewhere along the line,
But that's interesting how you see it from that point of view, where nobody else is thinking about it. What about sort of?
I'm like about everything.
Yeah.
Really
I noticed recently Puma, for instance, they went out of fashion for years, and then they came back.
Yeah.
Have you seen a certain type of shoe come back into fashion in a big way like that?
Everything comes round. It's. Skechers seem to be holding their own a bit. They don't. They sort of mediocre. Geox is more of a niche market, perhaps. And the adults are lovely stuff and things like that. And I've got a pair of shoes; they're fantastic, but they can be of a slightly not quite our fashion, if that makes sense. They fall out. they're not quite what we follow here, but in other places, you know, you look at, when I go to holiday, I look at people's shoes sometimes, you know, and the Germans have always got good stuff on. You can see, you know, they got quite, you know, cut off the bits of, you know, you look at it, oh my gosh, you know, and yet they spend a fortune on makeup and all that, you know, and all the other stuff, and then you look down and it's in the right mess, you know.
Well, in that sort of thought, then, do you find Tumble needs to up their game on the footwear?
You know, the kids will want what their kids will want. That's the trouble is, you get to a certain age when you lose control, and even my daughter's wearing blinky slide, and I hate them, you know, because they're dangerous, you know. I think anyway. But she's got a pair. But she has got a pair of decent shoes. She has a really good school shoes, the main thing, because they're in it for so many hours of the day, and you know, and that's important to give the support and everything like that. And I think if it's bad winter, you've got to have a decent boot as well, you know, something like that. But we haven't had. We were selling a lot of. So I had boots here with grips. You could pull the grips out, the German boots, from the sole and out, and you turn them round, and it gives you a tread and everything. You know, they're brilliant. You know, and but we haven't had that weather now for a few years. We're having nothing at all at the moment. So it's so things have changed dramatically in that respect. You know, so with the weather, I think and we haven't got the seasons like the 4 seasons anymore. We've got 2 seasons. So people are wearing their summer stuff longer, you know. And I think what was happening a couple of years ago, we were having even bad summers. I think one of my theories was that back in sort of 2008, 2009, when the recession came and all the banks collapsed and everything, the government deliberately closed it to stop people spending so much because we were overspending. Unfortunately, it coincided with the start of the bad summers, and we had 6 bad summers on the trot, effectively, 7, you know, and people weren't spending. They were buying cheap all the time for the summer because they didn't have to buy anything tidy because it wasn't here long enough.
I think that's a mentality that's continued
and it has continued. I've noticed now coming back, we've had a couple of decent summers coming back now. People are starting now again to look after their feet. We were selling sort of really nice hush puppy ladies flip flop type thing, but it was really well made and padded and everything, and you know, and it was good. It wasn't a bad price really, in the mid-30s and things like that. And you know, we'd sell them. We couldn't get enough of them, and all of a sudden, because of that weather, they'd only buy them for $9.99. And if they would throw them away afterwards. They wouldn't. You know, they'd only last them a couple of weeks. They wouldn't mind. But now that we're having better, we've got to get back into buying something for the weather. You know, more so. But again, we're never going to go back to buying for Easter. You know, we buy for Easter. We buy for summer. You know, whereas we're not buying the dressy stuff unless there's weddings. But again, you see, weddings, a lot of people don't marry in churches now. You don't see half the weddings you used to. They still dress up and everything, but a lot of people go abroad, and you know, I've seen people go abroad.
Yeah, fancy dress, even weddings and things these days.
Everything has changed, you know, in that respect. You know.
So you would see that really from the outside, with the church there. So. You know,
we're surrounded with
if anybody's going to see this, you're going to see it. You're going to see that difference.
Oh, there's a massive difference.
As well as the shoes itself.
Yeah, so things like that, you know. But people, having said that, then people go away a lot on weekends and they dress up for that, and they have, you know, they'll go over to Amsterdam or they go over to the, you know, the cities, the city breaks now, and it's become popular. So, and they do tend to dress up a bit more for that, then, you know, which is. You know, which is good. I never have the opportunity to dress up. Really, I'm always out walking the dogs or doing something. You know, so I get messed up. But it's, but yeah, that has changed a lot. I think. You know,
I think a lot in this village has changed. But it's great though to see that this business is still thriving and it's still doing well. And hopefully it'll be, you know, a big part of this community for many years to come.
Yes, as long as I last.
Yeah. Well, have you got thoughts about passing it down in the family?
My daughter, I don't know if she's interested. I can't see.
Maybe she won't have a choice.
She won't have a choice. No, what she said, she wanted to turn one part of the shop into a tattoo parlour. She wanted to do another one there. No, I wouldn't be surprised, mine. So,
well, it's been brilliant anyway talking to you. Lovely. Thank you for spending some time. And the wealth of history that you seem to know anyway.
I've got a fair memory for things, you know, but I wish I'd written a lot of it down, you know, because I've got loads more, so I tucked away.
I think maybe that's a good message for everybody, that we should be sort of recording our history.
Because it's easily forgotten, you know, so much so, you know. As I said, this cousin of mine passed away, and 2 cousins of mine passed away last couple of years. One was from Tumble originally, and you know, and they were font of information, you know. So it's and it's something. If somebody reminds you of something, you remember more things then, if that makes sense, you know. So you're having to grasp for things out of the air sometimes, which and there's a lot to be said about about us, you know, about the area. But I love travelling and finding places and nosing.
Don't we all? I think Tumble's got a knack for that.
That's fact.
Anyway, thank you very much for talking to me.
No problem.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I'll be back in a moment and just going to round things up. Thank you very much. So that's brilliant. Thank you for the opportunity. That was fantastic to see inside the shop, see what they do, and the sort of history that's connected. So there's Tumble fashion for you, and there's probably a lot more of it that would like to be involved in some way or another. Thanks for joining me tonight. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off now, and I'll be back towards mid-August, maybe late August. We'll try that, August. But this has been Esgidiau Cwm. You're brilliant. Thanks for joining me. I'll catch up with you soon. Over and out.